Welcome you all. We do have a typical land welcome that we do that the Interreligious Task Force on Central America has sent us, and we did have someone else to read it, and unfortunately I don't have it in front of me. Oh, I do have it. Yay! So, I will begin it. I thought. Well, guess what? So I'm going to do it from my heart, because we are on the land of many indigenous tribes, nations that were in Ohio long before the Europeans came to colonize this nation. And I could name a few of them: the Shawnee, the Potawatomi, the Iroquois, and there's many others. And I'm sorry I don't have them in front of me right now, but we do want to recognize the indigenous people that were on this land before the European settlers. And their plight continues to this day, and we want to welcome them as well, and the land. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. My name is Chardon Black. I'm currently a senior at the Cleveland School of Science and Medicine. And as we gather here today to reflect on Dr. Martin Luther King's Breaking the Silence speech, we're confronted with a call to action. Delivered on April 4th, 1967 at Riverside Church in New York City, this speech marked a pivotal moment in Dr. King's activism as he courageously spoke out against the Vietnam War, despite knowing his stance would be met with controversy and criticism. During his speech, it's a testament to overcoming our national allegiances in favor of morality, truth, and justice in an unfair world. Through his dissent against the Vietnam War, he fights against his own country, his own government, in favor of his beliefs, his dedication to civil rights, and his desire to overcome the binds of a flawed nationalism. In Beyond Vietnam, Dr. King eloquently connects the struggle of civil rights at home with the broader struggle for peace and justice around the world. He recognizes the interrelatedness of all forms of oppression, whether they manifest as racial injustice, economic equality, or the violence of war. He famously stated, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," underscoring the interconnected nature of social and political politics. In his call for the radical departure of the destruction of Vietnam, Dr. King was criticized. He was told that peace and civil rights don't mix, that he was hurting the cause of his people. Rather than retaliate against those who spoke out against him, he was hurt. He outlined the many reasons for his dissent in the first place, whether it be the manipulation of the impoverished, the prioritization of patriotism over human rights, or even the similarity of the struggle between Black Americans and those in Vietnam. Moreover, Beyond Vietnam serves as a powerful indictment of the moral bankruptcy of war and the destructive impact it has on the oppressed and the oppressor. Dr. King speaks with eloquence and urgency about the human cost of war and condemns the violence and suffering inflicted upon innocent people, both in Vietnam and in communities across America. In addition to his critique of militarism and imperialism, Beyond Vietnam also offers a vision of hope and possibility. Dr. King calls upon his audience to embrace a new ethos of love and nonviolence rooted in a deep commitment to justice and solidarity. He envisions a world in which the resources of ingenuity and humanity are directed toward meeting the basic needs of all people, rather than fueling the machinery of war and destruction. In reading Dr. King's speech, I came to find myself constantly reminded of my psychology class, where in this class we discuss the stages of morality. Pre-conventional, which seeks to achieve personal gain or avoid punishment. Conventional, which seeks to obey law and order and receive praise. And post-conventional, which sought to uphold universal ideas of truth, ethics, and knowledge. Dr. King's dissent against the Vietnam falls in the post-conventional stage. He epitomizes the highest level of morality despite the simple fact that he was willing to deny his government in the pursuit of humane truth. As those blessed to live in the Western world, we become ignorant of its spoils. We feast on ideas of nationalism and patriotism and militarism, while at the same time are arrogant as to just how privileged we are. Dr. King, however, as he described, was burdened to speak as who is beyond allegiances and loyalty, one who speaks for the weak, one who speaks for the weak, one who speaks for the voiceless, and those who would call our nation their enemy. One of the most striking aspects of Dr. King's speech is the condemnation of the triple evils of racism, poverty, and militarism. He argues that these forces are deeply intertwined and mutually reinforcing, perpetuating a cycle of oppression and violence that must be confronted head-on. Dr. King's analysis of these challenges allow us to recognize how systemic injustice operates on both the domestic and global scale, and to work toward dismantling these structures wherever they exist. In addition, his speech reminds me of our present day. I think of Palestine, which suffers from the same afflictions Vietnam did, who struggled through the same afflictions and oppression Vietnam did, not only from Israel, but from the United States as well. But I also think about those who carried the legacy of Dr. King's dissent, those who stood in every Cleveland City Council meeting advocating on behalf of Palestine, even when our government didn't. As we continue to grapple with the issues of war, inequality, and oppression, Dr. King's words remind us that the struggle for peace and justice is ongoing, and that every single one of us has a role to play in advancing that cause. In closing, I'll say this. As we listen to Dr. King's speech today through the words of the youth, learn the power of dissent. Learn to overcome ideals of conformity in favor of moral integrity and truth. Hear the struggles of Vietnam, hear the struggles from Black America, and understand the power of your own internal passions to overcome it all. Thank you.
Hey. I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. I join with you in this meeting because I am in deep agreements with the aims and works of the organization which has brought us together, clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. The recent statement of your executive committee are the sentiment of my own heart, and I find myself in full accord when I read its opening lines. A time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in times of war, nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the paths of conformities through within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, where the issues at hand seems perplexed, as they often do, in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty, but we must move on. Some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony, but we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak. And we must rejoice as well, for surely this is the first time in our nation's history that a significant number is religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the professing a smooth patriotism to the high ground of a firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace its movement well and pray that our own inner being may be sensitive to its guidance, for we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems so close around us.
Hello, everyone. Okay, here I go. Over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silence and to speak, from the burying of my own heart, as I have called for the radical departure from the discussion of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path at the heart of their concerns. This query has often loomed large and loud, Why are you speaking about Dr. Martin Luther King? Okay. Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. Aren't you hearing the cause of the people that they ask? And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concerns, I am nevertheless greatly saddened for such questions, meaning that the inquiries have not really known me, my commitment, or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest that they don't know nothing about the world they live in. In the light of such tragic misunderstanding, I deem it of signal importance to the trial of the state. Oh, my God. Clearly, why I believe the path from Dexter. In the light of such tragic misunderstanding, I deem it of signal importance to trial of state. Clearly, and I trust concisely why I believe that the path from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. The church is Mormonary, Alabama, where I began my pastorate, leads clearly to this. I come to this platform tonight to make passionate plea to my beloved nation. This speech is not addressed to Hanoi nor the National Liberation Front. It is not addressed to China or to Russia, nor does it attempt to overlook the ambiguity of the total situation to the need for a collective solution. Oh my God, of the Vietnam. Neither is it an attempt to make North Vietnam or the National Liberation Front paragon of a new, nor to overlook the role they could play in a successful resolution of the problem. While they both may have justifiable reason to be suspicious of the good faith of the United States, life and history give equipped testimony to the facts that conflict and never resolved without trustful and giving take to both sides. However, tonight I wish not to speak on Hawaii or the NLF, but rather on my fellow Americans who with me bear the greatest responsibility in the ending of a conflict. This has exceeded a very heavy price on both continents.
Since I am a preacher by trade, I suppose it's not surprising that I have 7 major reasons for bringing Vietnam into the field of my moral vision. There is at the outset a very obvious, almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in the struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiment, hope, new beginnings. Then came the build-up in Vietnam, and I watched the program broken and eviscerated as if it were some idle political playthings of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest in the necessary funds or energies of rehabilitation or of its poor as long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men. And the skills and money, some demonic destructive suction tubes, so I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and attack as such. Perhaps the more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and their husbands to fight and to die in extraordinary high proportion relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who'd been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found, Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. So we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die. Together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools, so we watch them in brutal solidarity burning the huts of a poor village, where we realized that they would never live on the same block in Detroit. I could not be silent in the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor.
My third reason moves to an even deeper level of awareness, for it grows out of my experience in the ghettos of the North over the last 3 years, especially the last 3 summers. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they asked, and rightfully so, what about Vietnam? They asked if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. For those who asked the question, aren't you a civil rights leader, and thereby mean to exclude me from the movement of peace, I have this further answer. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we chose our motto, to save the soul of America. We are convinced that we could not limit our vision to certain rights for Black people, but instead affirm the conviction that America would never be free or saved from itself unless the descendants of its slaves were loosed completely from the shackles they still wear. In a way, we are agreeing with Langston Hughes, that Black bard of Harlem, who had written earlier, "Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be." Now it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. It can never be saved so long as it destroys the deepest hopes of the men of this world. So it is that those who are yet determined that America will be are led down the path of protest and dissent, working for the health of our land.
Hello, everybody. Hello. As if the weight of such a commitment to the life and health of America were not enough, another burden of responsibility was placed upon me in 1964, and I cannot forget that the Nobel Prize for Peace was also a commission to work harder than I have ever worked. Before the brotherhood of man, this is a calling that takes me beyond national allegiances. But even if it were not present, I would yet have to live with the meaning of my commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. To me, the relationship of this ministry to the making of a peace is so obvious that I could sometimes marvel at those who ask me, why am I speaking against the war? Could it be that they do not know that the good news was meant for all men, for communists and capitalists, for the children and ours, for Black and for white, for revolutionary and for conservative? Have they forgotten that my ministry is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for them? What then can I say to the Viet Cong or the Castro or to Mao as a faithful minister of this one? Can I threaten them with death, or must I not share with them my life? Finally, as I try to delineate for you and for myself the road that leads from Montgomery to this place, I would have offered all that was most valid if I simply said that I must be true to my conviction that I share with all men to calling to be a son of the living God. Beyond the calling of race or nation or creed is this vocation of sonship and brotherhood. And because I believe that the Father is deeply concerned, and especially for his suffering and helpless and outcast children, I come tonight to speak for them. This I believe to be a privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than the nationalism and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions.
We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those who call it enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers. Strange liberators. And as I ponder the madness of Vietnam and search within myself for ways to understand and respond to compassion, my mind goes constantly to the people of that peninsula. I speak now not of the soldiers of each side, not to the junta of Saigon, but simply of the people who have been living under the curse of war for almost 3 continuous decades now. I think of them too because it is clear to me that there will be no meaningful solution there until someone attempt is made to know them and hear their broken cries. They must see Americans as strange liberators. The Vietnamese people proclaimed their own independence in 1945 after a combined French and Japanese occupation and before the Communist Revolution in China. They were led by Ho Chi Minh, even though they quoted the American Declaration of Independence in their own document of freedom. We refused to recognize them. Instead, we decided to support France in its reconquest of her former colony. Our government felt that the Vietnamese people were not ready for independence, and we again fell victim to the deadly Western arrogance that has poisoned the international atmosphere for so long. With the tragic decision, we rejected a revolutionary government seeking self-determination and a government that had been established not by China, but by clearly indigenous forces that included some communists. For the peasants, this government meant real land reform, one of the most important needs in their lives. For 9 years following 1945, we denied the people of Vietnam the right of independence. For 9 years, we vigorously supported the French in their abortive effort to recolonize Vietnam. Before the end of the war, we were meeting 80% of the French war costs. Even before the French were defeated in Dien Bien Phu, they began to despair of reckless action, but we did not. We encouraged them with our huge financial and military supplies to continue the war, even after they had lost the will. Soon, we would be paying almost the full cost of this tragic attempt at recolonization.
After the French were defeated, it looked as if the independence and land reform would come again through the Geneva Agreements. But instead, there came the United States, determined that Ho should not unify the temporarily divided nation, and the peasants watched again as we supported one of the most vicious modern dictators, our chosen man, Premier Diem. The peasants watched and cringed as Diem ruthlessly routed out all opposition, supported their extortionist landlords, and refused even to discuss reunification with the North. The peasants watched all this was presided over by the U.S. influence, and then by increasing numbers of U.S. troops who came to help quell the insurgency that Diem's methods had aroused. When Diem was overthrown, they may have been happy, but the long line of dictatorships seemed to offer no real change, especially in terms of their need for land and peace. The only change came from U.S. America as we increased our troop commitments in support of governments which were singularly corrupt, inept, and without popular support. All the while, the people read our leaflets and received regular promises of peace and democracy and land reform. Now they languish under our bombs and consider us, not their fellow Vietnamese, the real enemy. They moved sadly and apathetically as we herd them off their land, off their fathers into concentration camps, where minimal social needs are rarely met. They know they must move or be destroyed by our bombs. So they go, primarily women and children and the aged. They watched as we poison their water, as we kill 1 million acres of their crops. They must weep as the bulldozers roar, through their areas preparing to destroy the precious trees. They wander into the hospitals, with at least 20 casualties from the U.S. American firepower for one Viet Cong inflicted injury. So far, we may have killed 1 million of them, mostly children. They wander into the towns and see thousands of the children, homeless, without clothes, running in packs on the streets like animals. They see the children degraded by our soldiers as they beg for food. They see the children selling their sisters to our soldiers, soliciting for their mothers.
What do the peasants think as we ally ourselves with the landlords and as we refuse to put any action into our many words concerning land reform? What do they think as we test our latest weapons on them, just as the Germans tested out new medicine and new tortures in the concentration camps of Europe? They ask how we can speak of free elections when the Saigon press is censored and controlled by the military junta. And they surely right to wonder what kind of new government we plan to help form without them, the only party in real touch with the peasants. They question our political goals, and they deny the reality of a peace settlement from which they will be excluded. Their questions are frighteningly relevant. Is our nation planning to build on political myth again and then shore it up with the power of new violence? Here is the true meaning and value of compassion and nonviolence when it helps us to see the enemy's point of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment of ourselves. For from his view, we may indeed see the basic weaknesses of our own condition, and if we are mature, we may learn and grow and profit from the wisdom of our brothers who are called the opposition. At this point, I should make it clear that while I have tried in these last few minutes to give a voice to the voiceless on Vietnam and to understand the arguments of those who are called enemy, I am as deeply concerned about our troops that are as anything else. For it occurs to me that what we are submitting them in Vietnam is not simply the brutalizing process that goes on in any war where armies face each other and seek to destroy. We are adding cynicism to the process of death, for they must know that after a short period, that none of the things we claim to be fighting for are really involved. Before long, they must know that their government has sent them into a struggle among Vietnamese, and the more sophisticated surely realize that we are on the side of the wealthy and secure, while we create hell for the poor.
This madness must cease. Somehow, this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and brother to the suffering poor of the Vietnam. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak of the poor of America, who are paying the double price of smashed hopes at home and the death and corruption in Vietnam. I speak as a citizen of the world, for the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as an American to the leaders of my own nation. The great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours. This is the message of the great Buddhist leaders of Vietnam. Recently, one of them wrote these words: "Each day the war goes on, the hatred increases in the hearts of Vietnamese and in the hearts of those of humanitarian instincts. The Americans are forcing even their friends into becoming their enemies. It is curious that the Americans, who calculate so carefully on the possibility of military victory, do not realize that in the process they are incurring deep psychological and political defeat. The image of America will never be the image of revolution, freedom, and democracy, but the image of violence and militarism. If we continue, there will be no doubt in my mind and in the mind of the world that we have no honorable intentions in Vietnam. It will become clear that our minimal expectation is to occupy it as an U.S. American colony. And men will not refrain from thinking that our maximum hope is to goad China into a war that we may bomb and nuclear installations. If we do not stop our war against the people of Vietnam, immediately the world will be left with no other alternative than to see this as some horrible, clumsy, and deadly game we have decided to play.
The world now demands the maturity of the U.S., America, that we may not be able to achieve. It demands that we admit that we have been wrong from the beginning of our adventure in Vietnam, that we have been detrimental to the life of Vietnamese people. The situation is one in which we must be ready to turn sharply from our present ways. In order to atone our sins and errors in Vietnam, we should take the initiative in bringing a halt to this tragic war. We must realistically accept the fact that the National Liberation Front has sustained support in South Vietnam, and we must thereby play a role in meaningful negotiations in any future Vietnam government. Part of our ongoing commitment might well express itself in an offer to grant asylum to any Vietnamese who fear for his life under a new regime, which includes the Liberation Front. Then we must make what reparations we can for the damage that we have done. We must provide the medical aid that is badly needed, making it available in this country if necessary. Meanwhile, we in the churches and synagogues have a continuing task while we urge our government to disengage itself from a disgraceful commitment. We must continue to raise our voices if our nation persists in its perverse ways in Vietnam. We must prepare to match actions with words by seeking out every creative means of protest possible.
We must be prepared to match our actions with words by seeking out every creative means of protest possible. As we counsel young men concerning military services, we must clarify for them our nation's role in Vietnam and challenge them the alternatives of conscientious objection. I'm pleased to say that this path now being chosen by more than 70 students at my own alma mater, Morehouse College, and I recommend it to all who find the American course in Vietnam dishonorable and unjust one. Moreover, I encourage all ministers of draft age to give up their ministerial exemptions and seek status as conscientious objectors. There are the times for real choices, not false ones. We are at the movement when our lives must be placed on the line if our nation is to survive its own folly. Every man of human convictions must decide on the protest that best suits his convictions, but we must all protest. There is something seductively tempting about stopping there and sending us all off on what in some circles has become popular crusade against the war in Vietnam. I say we must enter the struggle, but I wish to go on to say something even more disturbing. The war in Vietnam is but a symptom for a far deeper malady within the American spirit. If we ignore the sobering reality, we will find ourselves organizing clergy and laymen concerned committees for the next generation. There will be concerns about Guatemala and Peru. There will be concerns about Thailand and Cambodia. There will be concerns about Mozambique and South Africa. We will be marching for these and a dozen other names, attending rallies without end, unless there is a significant and profound change in American life and policy. Such thoughts take us beyond Vietnam. Such thoughts take us beyond Vietnam, but not beyond our calling as sons of God, of the living God. In 1957, a sensitive American official overseas said that it seemed to him that our nation was on the wrong side of a world revolution. During the past 10 years, we have seen emerge a pattern of suppression, which has now justified the presence of U.S. military advisors in Venezuela. This needs to maintain social stability for our investments. Investment accounts for counter-revolutionary actions of American forces in Guatemala. It tells us why American helicopters are being used against guerrillas in Colombia and why American napalm and green bird forces have been active against rebels in Peru. It is with such activity in mind that the words of the late John F. Kennedy has come back to haunt us. 5 years ago, he said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Increasingly by choice or by accident, this is the role of our nation. This is the role our nation has taken. The role those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and the pleasures that come from immense profits of overseas investments.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm convinced that if we are going to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers profit, motives, and property rights are considered more important are considered more than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. That's still true today. On the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day, we might come to see that the whole Jericho Road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It's not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that in a system which produces beggars needs restructuring. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteousness and indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries and say this is not just. It will look at our alliance with the landed gentry of Latin America and say, this is not just. The Western ignorance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hands on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of ingesting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of people normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped, psychologically psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. U.S. America, the richest and most powerful nation in the world, can well lead the way in this revolution of values. There is nothing except a tragic death wish to prevent us from reordering our priorities. So that pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war. There is nothing to keep us from molding a recalcitrant status quo with bruised hands until we fashion into a new brotherhood.
Let us not join those who shout war and through the misguided passions urge the United States to relinquish its participation in the United Nations. These are days which demand wise restraint and calm reasonableness. We must not call everyone a communist or an appeaser who advocates the seating of Red China in the United Nations and who recognize that hate and hysteria are not the final answers to the problem of these turbulent days. We must not engage in a negative anti-communism, but rather in a positive trust for democracy. These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression, and out of the ruins of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. The shirtless and barefoot people of the land are rising up as never before. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. We in the West must support these revolutions. It is a sad fact that because of comfort, complacency, and morbid fear of communism, our opponents to injustice, the Western nations that initiated so much of the revolutionary spirit of the modern world have now become the arch anti-revolutionaries. This has driven many to feel that only Marxism has the revolutionary spirit. Therefore, communism is a judgment against our failure to make democracy real and follow through on the revolutions we initiated. Our only hope today lies in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit and go out into a sometimes hostile world, declaring eternal hostility to poverty, racism, and militarism. With the powerful commitment, we shall boldly challenge the status quo and unjust more, and thereby speed the day when every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. A genuine revolution of values means in the final analysis that our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Every nation must now develop an overriding loyalty to mankind as a whole in order to preserve the best in their individual societies.
This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all men. This often misunderstood and misinterpreted concept, so readily dismissed by the Nietzsches of the world as a weak and cowardly force, has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to the ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of St. John. Let us love one another. For the love is God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us. and his love is perfected in us. Let us hope that this spirit will become the order of the day. We can no longer afford to worship the God of hate or bow before the altar of retaliation. The oceans of history are made turbulent by the ever-rising tides of hate. History is cluttered with the wreckage of nations and individuals that pursued this self-defeating path of hate. As Arnold Toynbee says, love is the ultimate force that makes for the saving choice of life and good against the damning choice of death and evil. Therefore, the first hope in our inventory must be the hope that love is going to have the last word. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at the flood, it ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is deaf to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late. There is an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on. We still have a choice today, nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation.
Desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is adamant to every plea and rushes on over the bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations, written the pathetic words too late. That is an invisible book of light that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. Omar Khayyam's right to moving finger writes and having writ moves on. We still have a choice today, nonviolent coexistence, a violent co-annihilation. We must move past indecision to action. We must find new ways to speak for peace in Vietnam and justice throughout the developing world, a world that borders on our doors. We do not act, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time, reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. This is the calling of the sons of God, and our brothers wait eagerly for our response. Shall we say the odds are too great? Shall we tell them the struggle is too hard? Will our message be that the forces of American life militate against our rival as full men, and we send our deepest regrets? Will there be another message of longing, of hope, of solidarity with their yearnings, of commitment to their cause, whatever the cost? The choice is ours. Though we might prefer it otherwise, we must choose in this crucial moment of human history. As that noble bard yesterday, James Russell Lord, eloquently stated, once to every man and nation comes a moment to decide in the strife of truth and falsehood for the good or evil side. Some great cause, God's new Messiah, often eats the gloom of life, and the choice goes by forever twixt that darkness, though the cause of evil prosper. Yet his truth alone is strong, though her portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, yet that scandal sways the future. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. If we will only make the right choice, we will be able to transform this pending cosmic entity into a creative storm of peace. We will make the right choice. We will be able to transform the jangling discords of our world into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. If we will but make the right choice, we will be able to speed up the day all over America and all over the world, when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
We would like to thank you all for coming today. We'd like to give a special thanks to our students from Cleveland Metropolitan School District and the civics class. Real quick, we got Chardon Black over there. Larry Patterson in the house right here. Larry. Trayvon Johnson Stearns right there. We've got Tamaya Hatchell. Ray John Brown. Jaron Anderson, did I get it right? Did I say it right? Ooh, yay me. Okay, Kevin Weeder from Cleveland State University, Alma Rodriguez from Cleveland State University, Esther Ajamo from Cleveland State University. We've got Miriam, where are you? Cleveland State University. We'd also like to thank Muna, and we have, Stephen Connor from CMSD. I think Stephen's got a future in preaching, right? Okay. And we have Kadi, who's from IRTF, which we thank you, and Emily. And of course, the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., things really haven't changed much, have they, folks? So we need to be vigilant and take to the streets and walk peacefully so that we don't walk violently. And remember that we are all one. Cleveland Peace Action put this on. We do it every year. We thank you. We really appreciate Elizabeth and Gail from Cleveland Metropolitan Schools. And thank you all for coming. We've got snacks and refreshments in the back. There's some literature out front. And please, I would love it if the CSU students and the CMSD students could kind of chit-chat a little bit, because we want you all to come to college. Okay, thank you.